Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most influential horror games to have been released in recent memory. Too bad the story is still not good. No, you're not delusional. This is in fact another video trying to explain why the FNAF lore makes no sense, coming from the same creator who already made a video on said topic. And you might be asking yourself, why is he doing this to himself again? And the answer is, money! And because I feel embarrassed that my most popular video is a poorly thought out mess. In my defense, I didn't expect that video to take off the way it did, and I also made it in about a week. So it explains a lot of its issues. So once again, I'm going to try and explain the lore from a series that I both adore and absolutely hate, because why not? And maybe this time, the video would actually be watchable. The FNAF franchise has changed quite a bit since I made that video. 2 new games have been made, as well as an add-on that changed the direction of the series, an official spin-off was released, even more books, toys, an amusement park attraction, and even a soda. The movie that was stuck in development hell was even released, with its sequel coming soon. The FNAF franchise has somehow not only stayed relevant, but continues to stay strong. But despite all of this, the story has continued to stagnate, and in some cases get worse. It's no secret that FNAF doesn't have the most coherent of stories. Despite it having a simple premise, the lore is very complicated, having many twists and turns that constantly change the trajectory of the series. As soon as fans manage to get most things solved, even more complications arise when a new game gets released, and changes even more of the pre-established story. This stems from the fact that the story wasn't exactly planned out, as Scott Cawthon, the creator of the series, has been open about the fact that he was writing the story as the games came out. And here we are, having 10 games total, with each having vastly different lore implications and multiple add-ons that also change the lore a bit more for good measure. And once again, I'm going to try and break it all down. Before we start though, I'm going to lay out some ground rules to hopefully streamline the lore as best as I can. 1. I'm going to be playing every single one of the games. It can be very easy to pass up other YouTubers' videos as confirmed lore when in fact it's just a theory. Because of that, many lore videos base their knowledge from these theory videos rather than the games themselves. By doing this, it'll help to see what is actually in these games and see what was added later in supplementary material. 2. I'll be talking about the timeline by release order. I have seen so many breakdowns of the FNAF lore that try to explain everything chronologically, and that always gets messy really fast. I think the best way to experience this series is by going through it the way the fans did when they initially released. That way, I don't throw out crazy concepts that make no sense unless you're already familiar with the story. 3. No books or spin-offs. This series has a very bad habit of being really cryptic, and as a result, it was up to the fans to try and put pieces together. But once the books were released, fans immediately noticed that the books and games do have some crossover, and began to retcon stuff that happened in the games. In order to avoid confusion, we're only going to be talking about what happens in the games. I will also be mostly avoiding some of the spin-off games, such as Into the Pit and FNAF World, since those games are mostly their own thing. We will, however, bring up a few key points outside of the mainline games, because leave it up to FNAF to always have relevant lore in other media. 4. Avoiding most fan theories. Due to the nature of the series being so bare bones in its storytelling, it left many fans having to scavenge every detail in these games to solve the story. In some instances, it is a bit necessary, such as finding the date the games took place in, or even the name of the character you're playing as. But other times, it leaves fans missing the forest for the trees by focusing on stuff that really doesn't matter. So, without wasting any more time, let's try and explain why the Five Nights at Freddy's lore makes no damn sense. This game probably has the most straightforward plot of the entire series, which is funny since this game really doesn't have much of a plot. You play as Mike Schmidt, who was just hired to be a new security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. You're informed by a man on the phone, named Phone Guy, to look after these 4 lovely animatronics. and for some reason, they are allowed to roam around at night. They used to be able to walk during the day until the Bite of 87 incident, where an animatronic bit off the frontal lobe of an unknown person. Right away, this game sets up its premise perfectly. You must endure the wrath of these creepy and aggressive animatronics as they slowly progress through the building to try and enter your office. And if they do, they will, as the phone guy puts it,
they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit.
But just when you think you could shut the doors and call it a night, it turns out that the facility runs on half a AA battery, which depletes faster each time you shut your doors or even look at your cameras to keep track of these animatronics. Worse yet, every animatronic has a unique way to attack you, with some of them forcing you to look at them via the cameras, and if you happen to run out of power, basically, everything in this game is designed to get you killed. Fans like to make fun of the fact that the doors require power, but my own personal headcanon is that these are the only doors that are able to stop these freaks of nature. These guys are so huge and look like they could crush you with little to no effort, so it makes sense that the pizza facility put in military-grade doors just to protect their poor security guards, who either seem to quit immediately or are caught by the animatronics. As you continue your shift at the pizzeria, you learn more about its history, as at the beginning of each night, Phone Guy leaves you new messages to help you survive, but also lets slip a little bit more info on the facility. We learn about how shady the place is by how nonchalant Phone Guy is at the possibility of your death, which adds a bit of comedy to the whole situation, but it's also a bit morbid with the implication that the company will sweep your death under the rug. By night 4, Phone Guy reveals that all of his messages were recorded in advance, but he was unfortunate enough to get caught by the animatronics, with him asking the player to check one of the suits in the back to see if they could find his remains. Then on the final night, the animatronics seem to have left us a message. While the phone messages are the only direct form of storytelling in this game, you can sometimes discover secret newspaper clippings that shed even more light as to what happened. Apparently, there was an incident in which 5 children went missing within the premises. While their bodies were never found, a suspect was captured and was even convicted. The man apparently dressed in a mascot costume to lure the victims and presumably killed them. Despite the suspect being caught, the bodies were never discovered. There were later reports that customers began to complain about the sanitation of the pizzeria, as people began to notice that the animatronics began to spew out what seemed to be blood and mucus, as well as having a bad smell to them. We also learned that the company has been struggling to stay afloat after the tragedy, with them planning to shut down by the end of the year. While it's never outright stated, we can deduce that the killer stuffed the bodies inside the animatronics to hide them from the public, and once the coast was clear, they were likely taken somewhere else to never be found. Why the cops never bothered to look inside there in the first place doesn't make much sense, but it's fine. We could also assume that it was this action that caused the animatronics to presumably get possessed by the spirits of these children, and are now aggressive towards any adults. It could also explain why they might have bit someone to begin with, but the newspaper said that there was 5 missing children, yet there are only 4 animatronics. Well, if you're lucky, or use the custom night code, you could sometimes find a 5th animatronic that appears in your office, and shuts down your game if you don't get rid of them fast enough, making 5 total haunted animatronics, with all of them being possessed by different children. At the end of the game, we receive our paycheck, but Mike decides to do another night to get some overtime. You also have an option to do a bonus 7th night, which allows the player to make the animatronics as aggressive as they like. You can beat it at any level you choose, but at the end, you always get the termination notice, which notes that the player tampered with the animatronics as well as having bad BO, finally ending the events of the first game. All of this, of course, points to one thing, that this game is secretly about a real-life murder case, and that is the entire lore of the first game. It's very simple, and I think because of it, it's the best at conveying its story. You get through the week, learn what you need to know to survive, but dig a little deeper, and you find the reason why these animatronics want you dead in the first place. It's simple, yet effective. If this game had told its story more directly, I don't think this game series would have lasted as long, because the game in a way encourages you to look a little deeper. There are also some cool details that not only help build the lore, but also prove that these things are actually possessed. such as the moaning and gasping sounds that these things make when they get close to you, or how Freddy has the laugh of a child pitched down. It all makes for a creepy little game that can still freak you out even after all these years. This isn't a review for the games, but if you had to only play one of these, then I highly recommend this one. It still holds up surprisingly well, and can still be scary despite all the jokes and memes that have been levied at this franchise. Players were hooked, and due to its secret nature, it encouraged discussion as to what the story really meant. Why are these animatronics after us? Are they really possessed? And who was the killer? Is this type of speculation that allowed natural growth of interest in the series. Scott knew he had struck gold, quickly announcing that a sequel would be released soon. But where can this story take us next? This is when the story starts to get complicated. Similar to the last game, you once again play as a night guard, who is just hired to work for
at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
This is the grand opening of a brand new pizzeria, filled with new animatronics that have state-of-the-art security systems built in. It is a bit out there, but I guess it makes sense considering their past. Once again, you are given most of the story through Phone Guy's messages, which is a bit strange since he kinda died in the last game, but maybe it's a different guy with the same voice. Phone Guy once again assures us that everything is fine, but the animatronics do like to wander around the building looking for guests to entertain. They are also allowed to walk around during the day, but they were never given a proper night mode, and as such, they try looking for guests, leading them directly into your office. Phone Guy also let slip that a previous night guard complained about the conditions and was asked to be moved to the day shift. One key difference that you might have noticed is that there are no doors to protect you, which sucks for you, and the only way to defend yourself this time around is by flashing a light at these things, or by putting on a Freddy mask, which somehow fools the animatronics into thinking that you're one of them. While your first inclination is to put on the Freddy mask and call it a night, you also have to worry about this new feature that the restaurant installed, where you have to wind up a music box in order to keep a security puppet calm and prevent it from attacking you. This requires you to look at the cameras and thus not allowing you to put on the Freddy mask, leaving you open to an attack. If that wasn't enough, with each passing night, more animatronics are introduced, such as Balloon Boy, Mangle, and their original 5 animatronics that are all looking a lot worse. Now, this may seem like a lot to worry about. Anyways, Phone Guy brings up how the older animatronics are mostly used for parts and shouldn't be able to walk around at night. I'm sure that's nothing to worry about, but what's interesting is how Phone Guy tries to dispel the rumors going around about the establishment, as well as saying that the night guard has seen nothing unusual. But things take a turn on night 4, as Phone Guy brings up that an investigation is occurring at the restaurant. He once again states that there is no wrongdoing, but warns you to be a bit cautious around the animatronics, as someone may have tampered with them. On night 5, Phone Guy informs you that the building is in lockdown, implying that one of the employees are the prime suspects for foul play. Not only that, but a new position was just made available for the day shift, with Phone Guy even saying that you'll be moved to that shift. It's also during this call that he directly drops the name of a previous location, called Fredbear's Family Diner, with the new establishment trying to get a hold of the old owner. But the big twist comes at the end, when you receive your paycheck, and it's revealed that you're playing as someone named Jeremy Fitzgerald. Oh, and it turns out that this game is actually a prequel to the first game, as this game is set in 1987. This is both a cool reveal and really confusing. If this is set in the past, why are there more advanced animatronics walking around the place? The place should be investigated not just because of the implied child murder, but because of the advancement in technology. Like seriously, what were these inventors on? The Phone Guy establishes that there was yet another pizzeria open before this one was set up, meaning by the time of the first game, it's the third establishment, and all of them have apparently had a series of misfortune and disappearances. This does make me wonder just how many kids have disappeared, and how ruthless is this killer. But at least this does clear up as to why the Phone Guy is still alive. And while not outright stated, it does hint at a possible mishap with one of the animatronics during the day shift, which could have been the infamous Bite of 87, but that was never outright confirmed. But we're not quite done yet, as we have one more night to go through, and this one has the biggest lore implication out of the entire game. I'll just play this message as I think it paints the best picture.
Hello, what on earth are you doing there? Didn't you get the memo? The place is closed down, at least for a while. Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
Not only does Phone Guy sound distressed, but he also brings up that a yellow suit was used by someone in the building, making all the animatronics go haywire. He's also shocked that you're even there to begin with. Phone Guy brings up that he's going to be switching over to the night shift and mentions that there is another event scheduled, which is a strange commitment to make considering the circumstances, but that never comes to fruition, as by the end of the 6th night, you learn that the pizzeria has shut down. These last 2 nights also kind of explain why the Phone Guy was so dismissive that you were in any real danger, as up to this point, the animatronics were not as outwardly aggressive. The 7th night doesn't have much of a story, aside from the company once again firing you for bad odor and tampering with the animatronics. But this is still not the end, as we're also given many cryptic death minigames that shed a bit more light into the lore. Each of these may seem a bit nonsensical at first, but if you pay close attention, you may notice a lot of neat details. In one minigame, we play as Freddy, giving food to children, but you might notice a child, locked outside the building and crying. Paying attention to that character, you might notice a purple car pull up next to the child. A purple smiley man comes out, and we see that child go from crying to gray, with the man going back into his car before we are jump scared by the puppet. In another minigame, we play as Foxy, who runs from outside of his cove to surprise the children on the other side, which I guess counts for entertainment. But just before we surprise the children for one last time, you once again see the purple man standing by Foxy, and when you enter the other room, all the children are suddenly lifeless. Then there's the game in which you play as a puppet, giving masks to these lifeless bodies, but just as you give the mask to the 4th body, a 5th body appears in the middle of the screen just before Golden Freddy jump scares you. This one has the biggest lore implication, as the puppet seemingly allows these things to get possessed in the first place. Side note, but the only way to get these minigames is by getting jump scared repeatedly and hope that you get these games at random. So the reward to dying is getting a slim chance to play one of these lore relevant minigames that also jump scares you cause f*** you. Anyways, in the last minigame, you play as Freddy walking around the facility, in which you may find many carcasses lying around, other animatronics, and the puppet. But on rare occasions, you may find the purple man, who ends the cutscene short. While this may all seem like a bunch of nonsense, which it mostly is, you might have noticed that all of these have loose story threads. So, the story so far is this. Throughout the history of these pizzerias being opened, they have all been struck by a tragedy of children disappearing, with the purple man seemingly being present at the scene of each crime, which the community at this point have come to call Purple Guy. Look, we didn't have much information to go off on, okay? Purple Guy was seemingly responsible for making these children disappear and is heavily implied to be the killer. And that finally concludes the story of FNAF 2, which already has so much going on despite very little actually happening. Right away, we have our culprit, but who exactly is this Purple Guy? At this point of the series, it could realistically be anyone. It could have been one of the night guards from either game, or it could have been the Phone Guy. We really didn't have much information to go off on, okay? But this intrigue on who the Purple Guy was the fuse that sparked a lot of interest into the series lore. The story was still simple on its surface, but started to get a lot deeper in this one game alone. Things have already started to get a bit complicated, with this game being a prequel and with how much information we learned from it. I'm sure the next game will wrap it up on a neat bow. We are now 30 years in the future, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria has long been shut down. But looking to capitalize on the tragedy, a new company opens up a haunted house attraction based on the whole event, which isn't very poor taste, but to each their own. Also, since this game takes place 30 years after the events of the first game, it implies that this takes place sometime in the 2020s. Anyways, you are once again a new security guard who is tasked to look after this attraction as well as being part of the haunted house experience. called Fazbear Frights. There's no way they're paying you enough to do this shit. Nothing happens on your first night there, but on the second night, you're informed by the new phone guy, called Phone Dude, very creative name by the way, that they found a bunch of recordings from the abandoned pizzeria, as well as an old yellow suit.
You're not gonna believe this. We found one. A real one.
Right off the bat, we come face to face with this creepy thing that isn't quite an animatronic, but looks more like a man stuck in a suit. And this thing is trying to get into your office. But fret not, as you have a state-of-the-art security system to protect you from this thing, such as a voice box, and the world's shittiest cameras that crash if you use them for longer than 2 seconds, and a building with such poor ventilation that you lose consciousness if you don't maintain it properly. Oh, and a bunch of ghosts are also haunting you at the same time and crash most of your systems needed to survive the night. This game has a lot of major problems, but the main one is that it's kinda boring. I really don't like the aesthetic of this game, as this extremely run down and crappy haunted house leaves a lot to be desired. In the previous games, the setting was much more appealing and arguably creepier with how well lit they were and made them a bit easier to play, but this game just bores me to tears. It's also really annoying to play because unless you know what you're doing, most of the time you're going to be frustrated trying to get past the nights without being jump scared a million times. And also they all suck, but I'm not here to talk about the quality of the games, I'm here for the lore. And unfortunately, the lore isn't the most appealing this time around. The messages in this game are also a lot less engaging, since Phone Guy is mostly talking about the mechanics of a spring lock suit, which are these old machines that operated as both animatronics as well as a wearable costume. These suits also had a slight issue, being that if you so much as breathe in them wrong, it can malfunction and kill you on the spot. So they're only a little less dangerous than working at a fast food restaurant. But the biggest lore revelation comes when Phone Guy reveals that each Fazbear Pizzeria was equipped with secret rooms that were used to store away these spring lock suits. Apparently, someone thought that these suits were walking lawsuit machines and were put away and sealed shut in these secret rooms. And that's pretty much the extent of these messages. If you couldn't already put 2 and 2 together, whoever's trying to kill you was using one of these suits and is now possessing it. It's a really awesome idea and one of my favorite designs in the whole series because look at it. On top of the messages, you also get new mini-games at the end of each night where you play as one of the 4 animatronics roaming around the halls. But once you reach a certain room, Purple Guy pops up and dismantles you. Purple Guy proceeds to do this every night into the final night when Purple Guy comes face to face with the spirits of the dead children. After running around for a bit, Purple Guy thought it would be a brilliant idea to use the decrepit and rusty spring-lock bodysuit to protect himself, but that backfires spectacularly as it malfunctions, crushing him. I don't know what he was expecting. The ghosts then fade away as Purple Guy slumps over and bleeds out. This then turns out to be the bad ending, with the spirits of the dead children still possessing the animatronics, as implied by their lights still being on in the ending screen. In order to get the good ending, it is locked behind a series of hidden minigames that are thankfully not up to random chance to get, thank God. These minigames are somehow even more cryptic. They all have regular objectives, and beating them normally does nothing. However, all of these minigames also have a hidden objective, which is to break the game to find these hidden children and give them cake. These are thankfully not too lore relevant, as they're all mostly just nonsensical, with the exception of this one. This minigame shows 2 golden animatronics on stage entertaining children. While this minigame is still rather mysterious, this one at least sheds a bit of light as to what the original Fredbear Family Diner might have been like, as we have yet to see that location. If you manage to give cake to all the children, you can then complete the last minigame, where you give cake to a crying child at the pizzeria. All of these children wear masks that resemble the animatronics, and they all fade away, seemingly confirming that all the kids were indeed possessing the animatronics. And this minigame puts their souls to rest, somehow. So once you beat the game again, you finally get the good ending, as their souls are no longer in possession of the animatronics. But this is Five Nights at Freddy's, so of course there's a bonus 6th night, which gives us a new ending, informing us that Fazbear Frights was burned down, seemingly killing off Springtrap as well. Or did it? If you brighten up the photo, you can actually see Springtrap in the background, hinting at his return. Oh, and by the way, this guy's name is Springtrap. Despite this being the finale of the trilogy, it's surprisingly light on story, I think most of this can be attributed to the phone guy's messages not giving us much information besides details on how the spring lock suits work and the secret rooms they were stored in. It is cool that we learn where the bodies were potentially hidden and confirm that the purple guy was indeed the killer, but at the same time, we really didn't get much new information. We didn't even get the name of the guy we're playing as. That's how little info is in this game. I think everything was pointing towards this game being the finale, and I would have been satisfied enough with this being the end. But as we all know, there were just several questions left unanswered. But most importantly, the jump scare was lame. So Scott decided to bring us a new game to finally solve the last loose threads. This game is vastly different, not only because of the setting, but because of how vague and cryptic the story is, to the point that most people don't even know what happened in it. I'm serious, the fandom doesn't even know, and there's still debate as to who we're playing as to this day. That's how vague this game is. So you may or may not be playing as the crying child, who is this character we see at the beginning of each night, and he has the worst possible life. He is locked in his room, only accompanied by his stuffed animals. He walks around for a bit before curling to the ground and crying, so the average life of a Redditor. You then play the actual game, and it's certainly different. This time around, Scott decided to make the most terrifying game possible by making you have to turn your volume as high as you can to listen to the breathing noises coming from these monstrosities, who have the loudest jump scare known to man. It's cheap, but it's certainly effective, and a direct response to the previous game not being that scary. You essentially have to listen closely for these nightmare animatronics and pray that they don't get in your room. While the designs are very edgy and over the top, I do enjoy them a lot. If a child in this universe was afraid of these things, then this is exactly how they would imagine them to look like in their nightmares. It's great. At the beginning of each night, you are then greeted with more cutscenes that show off the crying child's horrible life. He gets bullied by his brother, he seemingly has no friends, and he's also locked inside rooms of the pizzeria that he seems to visit often. Also at the start of every cutscene, we also see text that a big event is coming in 5 days. Oh, and on one particular night, you can actually run into the purple guy, as he helps another employee put on a spring lock suit. Neat. On the final night, you face off against one singular nightmare animatronic named Fredbear. After surviving the night, we then have a cutscene of the crying child being bullied once again by his brother and friends. They all thought it would be hilarious to shove Crying Child's head into Fredbear's mouth. Then, Fredbear bites down. Finally showing us the infamous bite of 83. Wait, the bite of 83? As it turns out, if you explore some of the cutscenes, you can see a commercial play on the TV that confirms that this game takes place in 1983, which throws a lot of the lore out of whack. What do you mean there were two different bite incidents at this time of day in this part of the country, located entirely within the Fazbear establishment? This game could have been a perfect bookend to the series and finally answer what the bite of 87 was. But no, this game instead opens up a whole new can of worms that further complicate the story. And spoiler alert, after 11 games, we still don't know what the bite of 87 even was. This is what people mean when the lore gets seemingly confusing for no real reason at all. Because why add this plot point if this was supposedly the final chapter of the franchise? Aside from that annoying detail, there's also a 6th night that once you finally beat, you're granted access to the final cutscene, where the crying child's Fredbear plush seemingly talks to him and says they're gonna be put back together, whatever that means. This game also breaks new ground by having a hidden 7th night, where it seems normal at first, until you are suddenly greeted by this disturbing thing. This is Nightmare, and aside from being a cool design, I'm not really sure what the lore relevance is, aside from representing death itself. Once you beat this mode, you're then showed this box, which, after messing around with it for a bit, a message pops up saying not to worry about it, guy, and the game finally ends. Would you believe me if I said this story thread goes absolutely nowhere? There is no secret method to open this box, meaning that Scott left this in for it to be opened in another game, but this is the only time this secret box is ever mentioned. It's a very strange detail in an already mysterious game to begin with. It's like Scott put in all these details into this game, but never intended to solve any of it, which is why people are still debating about it to this day. Are you playing as the crying child, as he slips in and out of consciousness having nightmares? There are details that certainly support this theory, as we see IV drips and medications in the background on rare occasions, but because the story is so vague, some fans have also suggested that you're actually playing as the older brother, who is tormented by what he has done and is now having nightmares. Believe it or not, but after this game, this question gets more complicated as more details begin to contradict even these theories. But we will get there eventually. Because this game left even more unanswered questions, Scott decided that this game was not going to be the final chapter after all. Buckle up, because from this point forward, the lore starts to go truly off the rails. Remember when I said that I would bring up certain plot points from sources outside the mainline games? Well, this is the game when that annoying trend started to creep up. Before this game was released, Scott decided to branch off and make a non-canon RPG where you play as cute versions of the animatronics and go on an adventure. Maybe? I don't know, I never played it. While this game is non-canon, there is a bit of lore relevance. After an update, Scott decided to include this cutscene, in which we see a man sitting on a desk as he laments about what he has created, before he's interrupted by something.
The show will begin momentarily. Everyone, please stay in your seats.
This hints at a new antagonist and leads us directly into the next game, Sister Location. The game begins with this odd cutscene, where we are introduced to Circus Baby and its advanced technology to entertain children. But before the cutscene ends, some guy questions why they installed all these features, before name dropping Mr. Afton. You then begin the night proper, as you're hired to work for Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, which has these futuristic and advanced animatronics that are used for the express purposes of party rentals. Wait, what? Okay, this is the part of the series where I reached my breaking point. What do you mean there's an underground lair with even more state-of-the-art robots that are seemingly being used for the sole purpose of party rentals? How expensive is this operation? How much did it cost to have a hole in the ground to store these things? And why was this even funded to begin with? I can suspend my disbelief that children can possess these animatronics. I can even accept the toy animatronics with all their built-in security systems that were somehow built in the past. But this is where I officially draw the line at the lore being too stupid for its own good. In this one game alone, the genre of the series shifts dramatically from horror to sci-fi, and it becomes even more jarring from here on out. Sorry about that. Back to the story. Each night, you do a series of tasks around the building while evading the attempts of these animatronics trying to kill you. Then you clock out and watch your favorite show. But every night, Circus Baby will constantly talk to you and tell you that they need your help. You can trust her, just look at her face. Will this face ever betray you? The story just kinda meanders for a bit, as you have more and more complicated tasks to accomplish, while not really progressing the story all that much. This is also the first game where we hear other coworkers outside of you in the game. I wonder how they're doing. See, they're doing great. On the final night, Baby's plan is finally revealed. Every animatronic's exoskeleton was taken out of their shells and combined into this animatronic megazord called Ennard. And they lured you into an area called the scooping room, where, as the title implies, a machine scoops out your innards. Is that why he's called Ennard? The animatronics then use your skin as a suit and escape from the facility undetected. Then we see a cutscene, where we see the player's eyes, which are revealed to be purple. Finally, this game answers the question as to who the purple guy is. Turns out, the purple guy is a robot. Pack it up, boys. What do you mean there's an expansion? Sometime after this game's release, a custom night mode was added, which included some new cutscenes. In these cutscenes, we see Purple Boy walking around the neighborhood, but each day, his body gets worse and worse, until the final day, where his body rejects the animatronics and he throws them up in the sewer. But somehow, the skin rises up from the grave and the Purple Boy is still alive? Okay, yeah, sure, why not? After beating the hardest night custom night, we are then greeted with the final cutscene, where it's revealed that we're not playing this purple guy, but rather his son, named Michael. He talks about how he's surprised that he's alive since he's only skin, but that he also has one final objective, and that is that he's going to find his father, which is revealed to be Springtrap, aka the purple guy. But we're still not done yet, as we still have other secrets to try and explain. Like some of the previous entries, we have multiple endings, which thankfully aren't considered canon, but they do have some lore relevance. To get to the secret ending, we have to play this annoying as hell minigame, where we have to give cupcakes to all these children. After your 50th attempt, you will be able to find the last child, and after offering them some ice cream, Baby suddenly yoinks the kid, and the minigame ends. Completing this hell game gives you access to the new secret room on the final night, where you attempt to avoid Ennard from getting to you. Baby basically taunts you the entire night, but the further along you get, Baby's voice changes to that of a little girl, who seems to know who you are.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with her again?
No, it was an accident. Everything is okay. Still here.
That's not all, as if you input 1983 into the number pad on the wall, you will see the monitors on what appears to be the bedroom from FNAF 4. I'm sure this won't have any serious lore implications. Anyways, you end the night, and you head on home. But Ennard shows up to your house because you left your keys at work. This is referred to as the fake ending, but it does explain a bit more about the story. At the beginning of the game, we are told that Circus Baby has all these features that are kinda creepy if you think about it for more than a second, which Mr. Afton seemingly installed for ulterior purposes. We also have a secret dialogue from Baby on one of the nights, where she tells a story about the one time she was up on stage. She explains that she kept track of everyone at all times, and when one little girl was alone with her, she suddenly snagged the kid. Circus Baby was then immediately retired after this incident and was put underground. We also learned that there was yet another pizzeria called Circus Baby's Pizza World or something, which means that we have 4 separate pizzerias, by the way, where in all of them some sort of tragedy has occurred. After playing the secret night, we can deduce that Baby was most likely possessing the little girl that was snagged during the minigame. By the way, I do think that it's a cool detail that in the minigame, in each screen, there's always more than one kid, but the only time she activates is when a kid is alone. Good job, Scott, you did it. You did a lore building. Based on the secret night dialogue, we can reasonably conclude that Circus Baby is actually Michael's sister, and therefore, Purple Guy's daughter. Also, since the secret office has those monitors that show the bedroom of FNAF 4, as well as the Fredbear plush that shows up in those cutscenes, we can assume that the crying child is part of this family as well. While it's not outright stated, we can reasonably deduce that this office was used to spy on the crying child. So, if you want to keep track of all of that, Mr. Afton had 3 children who all had incidents involving animatronics to some capacity, including him who was sprung locked all the way back in the 3rd game. That was a lot. But who exactly is Mr. Afton? Well, you're going to love this. It's never explicitly stated in the games. For whatever reason, Scott decided that it would be a brilliant idea to reveal the big bad of the series in a non-canon book, which is really annoying, especially for the illiterate like me. Around the release of Sister Location, the first of many FNAF books were released, which, according to Scott himself, are not directly tied to the games, but do have heavy inspiration from them. This basically means that Scott will occasionally lore drop in these books, and if you're not reading every single book, you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff. In Scott's first book, he reveals that this guy, named William Afton, was actually the purple guy all along, and he posed as a fake security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. I bring this up because as soon as this information was revealed, the FNAF community went ballistic when Mr. Afton was introduced in the opening cutscene, but it also annoyed many other fans that don't want important lore information to be dropped in media outside of the games, cause it just makes the whole story a lot more convoluted. Speaking of outside media, did you know that Baby Circus World, or whatever it was called, was canonically shut down due to gas leaks? Anyways, while the name William Afton is not directly stated in this game, we will now be calling the purple guy William Afton from now on. You all got that? No? Good, cause we're moving on. And that's pretty much the whole story from Sister Location. And from a lore perspective, this one is one of my least favorites in the entire franchise. This is when the story shifted from being horror to being more sci-fi. The animatronics designs went from being Uncanny Valley to be more evocative of retrofuturism, which I feel like greatly affects how the series is perceived as a whole. There are some creepy elements in this game, but for the most part, this is when the game started to lean more into child-friendly territory, with each animatronic not being able to talk, with LOL so random humor that started to become more prominent. It bums me out that Scott leaned so heavily into this aspect of the series because from this point forward, the series only got more family friendly. But even despite all of that, I still like how dumb the lore is getting, and I'm all here for it. Like seriously, how can someone just come back alive as just walking skin? Someone in the FNAF community, please explain why this is allowed. Scott is pretty much flying by the seat of his pants and making up the story as it goes along. I'm both excited and dreading to see how much more convoluted this can get, and let's see where the next chapter takes us. Prepare yourselves, this one is gonna be a lot. This game is probably the most unique of the whole series, as it has the most amount of lore without having much of a story, but at this point, I guess that's just FNAF. This game first appears as a similarly simple 8-bit game, where you have to build your own pizza and feed it to the kids, before it corrupts itself, and we then come face to face with Baby. We are instructed to listen to these audio tapes, which play some rather ominous sounds. As the sounds continue to distort themselves, suddenly, Baby begins to talk to us.
Audio prompt in 3,
2, 1.
The real game proper then begins, as we are told that we are now managing our very own Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria. After all the horrible tragedy and failure of this franchise, I'm sure this is a wise investment. You're presented with only one goal in mind, and that is to make the business as profitable as possible. And you do that by turning your establishment from looking like this to this. The game is split into 3 different parts, all of which help you achieve your goal of becoming successful. The first part is the simulator portion, where it basically plays like a tycoon style game. You buy materials for your pizzeria, manage the floor plan, as well as testing out the attractions. Before you complete your day, you must then play through the office portion, where you have to complete these tasks in this creepy room that have 2 giant vent openings right next to you, which you are told have nothing bad in them. And finally, you then have the salvage portion, where you face off these extremely worn down and hard to comprehend animatronics. You are told that you can bring these animatronics for salvage, which give out huge payouts if you successfully pass a test. However, these things will attack you if they get too aggressive while you're testing them out, which results in getting no money, as well as these things becoming loose in your pizzeria. You do have a way to defend yourself, and that is by shocking them, but don't overdo it, as if you shock these things too many times, the value of the salvage goes down. And once you do salvage them, they still become loose in your pizzeria, but at least you get paid. Once the animatronics are inside your pizzeria, they then start affecting the office portion of the game, as they can now attack you while you're trying to complete tasks. You have to complete every task in order to complete your shift, and each time you do any task, it ends up making a lot of noise, which attracts the animatronics to your location. But don't worry, as all you have to do is flash your lights at a vent to prevent an animatronic from spooking you. Oh, and you can't actually see them going in the vent because f*** you. This is my least favorite gameplay loop, because it's the one that feels the most random, even worse than FNAF 3. In that game, we can at least understand that playing the voice box attracts Springtrap away from you. Even if it always doesn't work, it at least gives you some sort of idea on how to defend yourself. But here, it's very hard to understand what to do. It especially gets worse the more animatronics enter the pizzeria. Again, sorry for raging on the gameplay, but it's something I couldn't really avoid talking about, at least in this game. Let's get back to the lore. Whenever you do the salvage minigame, a voice from the tape player tells you that these things seem to be attracted to the pizzeria for a strange reason. While it's completely optional on whether or not you salvage or throw these things away, at the very end of each night, the voice tells you that you need to have them all gathered before Saturday. Strange. And if you do throw these things out, there are other ways that animatronics can sneak into your pizzeria. In the simulator portion, you may notice some items that are greatly marked down but have a warning stating that something may be hiding inside. which is another way for the animatronics to get in without you noticing. And that's pretty much the gameplay loop of this game. Simulator, office, salvage, repeat. I would say this is pretty boring, but the simulator portion is honestly really fun. But it does make me question on how you could turn the image of such a tarnished brand to the point of it actually becoming successful. Like sure, people are gonna want to come back here, which is famous for its aggressive animatronics, and the children disappearances. There's also one last game mode, and that is the lawsuit portion. This only occurs if you make your pizzeria as dangerous as possible, which gives you a higher likelihood of getting sued. There really isn't that much relevant info here, but you do learn that this series takes place in Utah, which is the scariest detail yet. Now you may be wondering, where is the lore? So far, all that we know is that you need to collect all the animatronics and make it till Saturday. Well, get ready because this is when the game truly becomes a rabbit hole. This time around, you're being pursued by 4 main animatronics, who you might have noticed are all looking a bit strange. First, we have Baby, who in between games got kicked out of Ennard and is now her own animatronic again, but looks nothing like her previous iteration. You may be asking yourselves, why and when did this happen? And the answer is no one knows. I'm being serious. There has never been an explanation as to why Baby was taken out of Ennard, other than to have her be her own animatronic again. Then we have Molten Freddy, who is just Ennard but with Freddy in charge, and now has a screwed up Freddy face. I don't like his design. It's way too busy and looks like a worse version of Ennard, who is a character I already didn't like in the first place. Then we have the return of fan favorite Springtrap. Oh my god, what's wrong with your face? So Scott decided to change his appearance in between games, and my only guess as to why he did this is that after the events of FNAF 3, Springtrap basically had to redesign himself to stay alive, but somehow ended up looking nothing like he did in FNAF 3. Also, he changed his name to Scraptrap and talks like a generic bad guy now. No, I don't know why he did that either. Finally, we have Lefty, who might seem like a completely new animatronic, but in a super rare screen, we can actually see that Lefty is in fact the puppet, as evidenced by the black and white arms, which is exactly the same as the puppet. Why did the puppet come back despite being put to rest in the events of the 3rd game? I don't know. It's revealed in the books, but I'm not gonna bother with that because it involves solving a bunch of riddles that, honestly, who cares? Just know that the puppet is back, and now they're inside Lefty, okay? After collecting every animatronic and suffering through the office portion, Baby once again reveals her grand plan, and that is that she's going to kill you. Before she does, however, she is then interrupted by someone on a tape recorder. They then proceed to exposition dump like no one has ever done before, but it's so good that I will let it slide. The man on the tape goes on to explain that he was the grand mastermind behind the whole operation, with the hopes of finally putting every one of these things to rest by burning down the building. That's one way to do it. He reveals that Baby's real name is Elizabeth Afton, noting that she probably doesn't even remember that name anymore. But most importantly, the man reveals that Lefty was his daughter. He was aware that her soul possessed the puppet, but he laments the fact that he was unable to save her from William Afton, and figures out that it was this action that caused her to become a relentless spirit, as well as giving life to the other missing children, allowing the animatronics to get possessed in the first place. The man also addresses William Afton, who the man refers to as an old friend, and hopes that he burns in hell. Finally, he addresses the player, stating that he's aware that you probably would like to perish alongside the animatronics, as well as him who is just off screen, waiting for the horror to be over. While it's never outright stated who we play as, we can reasonably assume that we're once again playing as Michael Afton, the walking skin suit from the previous game, wanting to be put to rest, as well as end the long suffering life that he and his family lived through. And that pretty much resolves the story of Pizzeria Simulator, but we're still not done, as this game has many secrets to help flesh out the lore even more. During the simulator portion, we can play many arcade games which are only there to give us more profits, but 3 of them actually have a hidden story. In one game, we play as a little girl who plays through this rip-off version of Pac-Man. Everything is pretty normal on your first playthrough, but on the second, you will notice that she is actually quite upset, as well as the game getting a lot more unsettling. But things take a turn for the worst on the 3rd playthrough, as the game becomes a lot creepier, with blood trails and dead dogs being scattered all around the area. The game then abruptly ends when we hear car horns blaring, followed by what appears to be William Afton appearing behind the girl, seemingly luring her away from the public. That was creepy as hell. If you couldn't figure out what this means, this was just a way to show us how William lured kids away from the public to make them disappear, just as how it was stated in the very first game. Then we have Midnight Motorist, which is just a driving minigame at first, but you can actually leave the track completely and drive into a cutscene. I'm going to be blunt, I'm not even going to attempt and explain what this minigame really means, because no one has been able to figure it out. Even to this day, the FNAF community is still trying to figure out what this minigame really represents and when it takes place. My best guess is that we play as William Afton after doing a shift of his job, which was probably running his business to the ground. He attempts to enter a place called Junior's, but is told that he isn't allowed in after what happened, whatever that may mean. He then goes home. There is also a person on the couch who tells William to go easy on the kid, and when he tries to enter his kid's room, he notices that the door is locked. William then walks behind the house and notes that the kid once again ran off to that place, while we see what appears to be animatronic footsteps on the foreground. Again, what this minigame means and how it fits into the lore is beyond me, but my best guess is that this was just a random day in the life of William Afton. Finally, we have the security puppet minigame, where we actually do nothing for the first 2 attempts, as we're instructed to make sure that a kid with a green bracelet doesn't leave the building, but they never show up. On the final playthrough, we can actually see that the kid with the green bracelet is locked outside the building and crying. The puppet tries to get to them, but they are blocked off from leaving their box. The child then disappears, before the puppet eventually does manage to escape the box. The puppet then goes outside on the rain and starts to deteriorate, but before they notice a lifeless body on the ground, to which the puppet crawls up next to them, and then the game ends. This minigame is essentially an extension to that one minigame from FNAF 2, but this time we get to see the aftermath and once again confirm that the puppet is also possessed by this child, who happens to be the man on the cassette's daughter. But we're not done yet, as the game holds this pretty mysterious ending locked behind a pretty expensive item. If you manage to afford it, or cheat like I did, then when you get to the office portion, you can actually unlock a bunch of hidden schematics and an audio log that you're not supposed to be privy to. The audio log is mostly just a man talking about how he has no idea or how the animatronics managed to get possessed by the souls of the children, and laments that he was not able to stop it in time. He also talks about how much of a monster William Afton is, since he was able to do so much damage, and continue the carnage even after he passed away. The man also talks about how he needs to gather every animatronic together, so he can end the madness once and for all. The schematics refer to something called Remnant. Now, you may be asking yourself, what the hell is Remnant? And the game doesn't tell us. This is something once again borrowed from the books, and it's a scientific explanation as to how the animatronics can get possessed in the first place. It's elaborated more in the books, but I don't want to get into it because it makes the lore so much stupider. But this little schematic does show off the scooper from Sister Location, which was used on Michael on the final night. The scooper, I guess, is like a machine that pulls out remnants, and this is kind of the explanation as to how Michael can still be a walking skin suit. But I thought it was way funnier when his soul was just too determined to die. Then we have even more confirmation that the puppet is inside Lefty, as its suit was specifically designed to keep the puppet calm, since it constantly emits a lullaby, similar to the music box that we used to calm it down in FNAF 2. Then we see the name of the tape being HRY223. Once the audio tape ends, we are immediately granted the insanity ending and kicked out of the pizzeria. So, who is the man talking on the tape? Well, you're going to love this. The game doesn't tell us because it's once again tied to the books. In the books, we learned that William Afton had a partner in crime named Henry Emily, who helped build Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Why do this to us, Scott? Anyways, back to the games. Henry was basically struck with the worst luck ever. His business partner turned out to be a crazy maniac, his only child was taken away from him by William, and he basically saw the empire that he built crumble before his very eyes. Before he could even get justice, William becomes a furry and disappears from his life for over 30 years. But he is well aware that the souls of the children are more than likely possessing the animatronics and causing more harm. While he's unable to do anything at first, he finally makes a lifelong plan to once and for all end the madness, which finally resolves almost every major plot point from the previous games, except with a few points that are never fully addressed. like the bite of 87, as well as who was convicted if the killer was revealed to have never been captured. If you remember, in the newspapers from the first game, we learned that someone was tried and convicted for the disappearances of the children, but my only real guess as to what happened there is that Scott forgot. Like I said, Scott never planned for the series to go on for so long, and he either forgot to address it, or it will be retconned in a future installment. It's fine, since in the grand scheme of things, this matters very little, since the killer will end up being trapped inside a Freddy suit for the rest of his life, or the cops simply arrested the wrong guy. And finally, once you complete the final night, you see a picture of the gravestones with the names of the missing children against the sunset, similarly confirming the souls have finally been put to rest. Again. For reals this time. After all of that, we finally conclude not just this game, but the entire story, as this game basically serves as an endpoint for the original saga. We finally managed to get here, and while it was messy and very stupid, I am at least glad that Scott managed to end the series in a satisfying enough conclusion that finally pleased most of his fans. While I do think the series did veer off way off the beaten track, I did enjoy the journey, and I am glad that the story is mostly coherent, even if it did take a lot of explaining to do so. But I guess that's just the price you have to pay when you insist that the story is not the main focus of these games, since after all, most people are only here for the spooky jump scares, and story second. Still, I enjoyed the wild ride these games took us on, and I'm glad that it's finally over. This game really doesn't count, as it was a bonus challenge mode meant to please fans who wanted more chaos in Pizzeria Simulator, and those who wanted another challenge similar to 1020 mode from FNAF 2. But this being FNAF, the game ends up having some lore relevance, even if it is pretty hidden for the most part. In this game, we play as William Afton, who is currently stuck in Super Hell, being tormented by the souls of all the people he has killed over the years. It's a pretty neat idea, and a fitting punishment for Mr. Afton, as it is his fault that all of this happened in the first place. This game is possibly the most light on story out of the entire series, as there's very little to talk about, aside from a few lore nuggets sprinkled in. If you get killed by some of the animatronics, they go on to say who they were and when they were possibly killed, which, to me, doesn't really matter, unless you're one of those people who has to know who each and every kid's name was. Some of these animatronics also go on to talk about the one you should not have killed, which in my opinion, I don't think William should have killed any of them, but I guess one of them mattered even more, since they had supernatural powers or something, and is probably the entity that is trapping William in Super Hell. Who this entity is never stated, but you can vaguely see them in rare instances, and some have theorized that this entity is Golden Freddy. Also, there's this theory that says that Golden Freddy is haunted by two spirits, which is kinda hinted at in this game, as if you use something called a death coin on Golden Freddy while he's at level 1, a different jump scare will trigger, rather than his superior PNG jump scare. This is more supported in the books, but I'm going to choose to ignore it again, cause it really doesn't matter, unless if you ask me. Like, whoa, two spirits can inhabit one animatronic? That's neat, I guess. Anyways, after certain jump scares, we can even hear this entity talk to us, but only very faintly, and they state that they're going to keep William in here forever.
This is how it feels, and you get to experience it over and over and over again, forever. I will never let you leave.
There's also a secret cutscene in which we are transported into a lake alongside this character from FNAF World named Old Man Consequences. He basically tells William that he needs to give up and let the demons take care of him. William is then drowned, and if you play around with this audio, it sounds like William screaming in agony. And that's pretty much the extent of this game's story. Sure, there are some random ass cutscenes for completing certain challenges, but the one that matters the most is the one you get for beating the absolute hardest challenge, which shows us Golden Freddy, still possessed and not resting, presumably staying alive so they can torture William forever, finally ending the Five Nights at Freddy's story. While Pizzeria Simulator did end the story, Scott didn't want to stop the games from rolling out, but he has taken a huge step back from making them and instead hired a third party to work on them. So while he isn't the sole creator of the series anymore, he still does have huge input as to where FNAF goes next. This does, however, create a whole new problem, where a different creative team essentially starts interpreting the lore rather than Scott himself, and this has led to some rather mixed results. The basic premise is that we play as a beta tester for this brand new VR game based on the original FNAF games, but things go immediately off the rails in the game's intro, as it is revealed that all the previous games that we just played are actually not true events, but instead, they are in-universe games released by a rogue indie developer who made them to tarnish the reputation of the Freddy Fazbear establishment. Hold on, cause it gets better, because the best course of action that the company decided to do was to make their own game to put to rest the nasty rumors that spread about the pizzeria, which happens to be near exact replicas of the previous games. I have several questions. What do you mean the games exist in universe? What does that mean for the lore? Are the games even canon? Why did Fazbear Entertainment decide that basing a whole VR game where the animatronics kill you was a good idea? Was this some sort of joke? Even ignoring the logic behind all of that, how the hell did he bounce back from relevancy after everything that happened to them, including having multiple disappearances, a conviction, multiple establishments shut down, and several places having been burnt to the ground? Who is even running the business now that the two heads of the company are gone? Sorry, I just need to vent about this because the lore just gets more convoluted from here on out. But this strange ass plot point was most likely put in so they can have an excuse to recreate these games in VR. Anyways, we play as a game tester who plays through the entire VR game to make sure that there are no nasty bugs that can cause potential problems. But you might have noticed that there's this certain green rabbit off in the distance, seemingly waving at us. The more games you complete, the closer the green rabbit gets to you. I'm sure most of you have figured out by now that this guy in the rabbit costume is actually none other than William Afton once again hiding in a rabbit costume. But how exactly is he back if you know he died and is stuck in super hell? Don't worry, we'll get there. Despite this odd thing, most of the game's story is hidden, surprise surprise. If we play through this game regularly, we pretty much play the same games as before, but this time in VR. There is also a few game modes that kind of break the lore a bit if you think about it for a moment. Like, why are some of the nightmare animatronics here? I thought those things were not real and part of someone's imagination, but nope. This game nonchalantly confirms that at least some of these guys are real, including the nightmare version of the puppet, who is only introduced in FNAF 4's Halloween update, which is just a very strange thing to add, and puts into question as to what the hell happened in FNAF 4 even more. While the game is packed with a lot of modes, the story is once again bare bones, which I guess has to be a tradition at this point, as the player once again has to find secrets in order to uncover the game's true nature. So there are these hidden audio tapes that are scattered throughout the whole game, and upon collecting them all, we learn that there is indeed something wrong with this game. The audio tapes were left behind by a game developer in order to warn whoever's playing the VR game not to play it. A little late on the warning, the person on the audio tapes proceeded to tell us that the game was commissioned by Fazbear Entertainment to sanitize their image, as well as this being an elaborate way for them to cover up the tragedies from the past. She goes on to state that during development, their team got an assortment of old animatronic parts from the old pizzeria, and they thought it would be a brilliant idea to scan in old circuit boards from these things to help code their game. Okay, sure. Once they did that, a certain green rabbit started to appear in the build of the games, and no matter what they did, they could not get rid of it, almost like it was corrupting the game itself. The developer goes on to state that slowly but surely, development for the game started to get hectic, as one of her coworkers named Jeremy started to act weird. He complained that he was getting nightmares, he would frequently talk to himself, and be stuck testing the VR game for hours. Development for the game was also difficult, as they were stuck in a tight deadline, and the budget for the game was apparently slashed, meaning they ended up laying off multiple of their staff. Wow, just like in real life. The game developer goes on to say that it was basically up to her to try and stop whatever was causing this glitch to spread, but she had to do it discreetly, as the glitch seemingly became aware of her. She tried to purge it, but just as she thought she got rid of it, she realized that the glitch ended up hiding itself in the audio tapes. As a last-ditch effort, she scattered the logs across the game and warned the player not to reassemble them, as this might cause the glitch to come back. Oops. Once you complete every level in the game, you unlock this final level, called Pizza Party. It's essentially this labyrinth where you have to follow a certain sequence to escape, but just when you think you made it out, you are then greeted by a pizza party, and a man in a yellow suit beckons you to follow them. You would then be seemingly stuffed inside a Freddy costume, as the man in the yellow suit dances in front of us, pretty much confirming that William Afton is indeed the glitch that was corrupting the game as we were stuffed inside an animatronic. You mean to tell me after all the work we did to finally put an end to William Afton, to the point that we banished him to Super Hell, he still somehow comes back? Yes, I know I'm referencing the meme, but it's really annoying that this franchise really only has 2 story beats that it uses over and over again. It's even dumber that William's consciousness was somehow backed up into the circuit boards from the 1980s, like, sure, he was so forward thinking enough to upload his brain to the cloud. Luckily, there is another ending that paints a bit of a more interesting future. If you accidentally bring all the tapes together, which the tape girl warned us not to do, Glitch Trap, as the fans like to call him, suddenly appears right next to us. You are then put in a minigame, where you have to try and flush him out of the game, but this seemingly backfires, as once we do this, we are then suddenly locked behind a door, to which the glitch appears behind it before he closes the door on you. But with the hints that the audio tapes gave us, we can deduce that Glitch Trap ended up swapping consciousness with the player, with him now being in full control. This hints that whoever the next big villain is, they will be possessed by Glitch Trap and will cause more trouble in the near future. And once you return to the hub, you will notice that Glitch Trap has been turned into a marketable plush, the Whore. And that's the story of Help Wanted, and what a headache that game was. This game demands so much just to set up its basic premise, and I think it ends up losing a lot of people because of it. I think this is the point where many fans started to get even more confused as to what the hell was even going on, which is saying a lot, because you pretty much had to have a PhD in autism to even understand the FNAF lore to begin with. Even with its dumb premise, and even dumber reason to bring back Glitch Trap, the idea of a new killer who is possessed isn't the worst idea in the world, and could really help branch out the story even further. This isn't the end though, as a Halloween DLC was added to this game, but luckily for us, the announcer pretty much tells us that this game is mostly non-canon, thank God. The only noteworthy thing about this DLC is that it's set during something called Fall Fest, which is a celebration that we have never heard of before. This event is still shrouded in mystery, so I won't dwell on it too long, as I'm sure it will be retconned or changed in later games. The other notable aspect of this DLC is this corn maze minigame, where you have to collect keys to escape, all the while avoiding Foxy, who is set on fire by the way. There are multiple keys scattered throughout the maze, as well as multiple exits, so it isn't too difficult. But if you manage to collect all the keys, then a new glitch key will appear. And if you head back to the beginning of the maze, you will see a new room has opened up. If you enter this room, you will then find a gift box with a rabbit mask inside. If you then go back to the prize corner, you can actually put on the rabbit mask, and if you bring in the Glitch Trap plush, the player will actually talk to it, and it's revealed that whoever we're playing as was indeed possessed, seemingly confirming again that they will be the next antagonist of the new game. And finally, there is actually a bonus ending added to the game. If you play through Pizza Party again, at the end, you will notice that a door is actually open, and if you exit, you will see off in the distance something being under construction, with a billboard saying that it's coming soon. And this finally concludes the story, and man, what a drag this game was. Gameplay wise, I actually had a really good time, as it was cool to see these games finally be put in real time, so to speak, and while I only played this game in flat mode because I'm broke, it was still cool to see all the effort that was put into remaking this game into 3D. Sure, I'm not a fan of its story, and I think some of the details here break the lore a lot more than I would like, but at least it does give us a hint as to how much potential this new story has to tell. Hopefully the next game manages to deliver. This game sucks. I didn't mean to start off so harshly, but I don't like this game. It's a buggy, overloaded mess that is so big and confusing that I frequently found myself completely lost and frustrated as to what I even needed to do. This game is probably best encapsulated by Markiplier's playthrough, which was riddled with so many game-breaking bugs that it's honestly a spectacle to behold. but even being aware of how poorly designed this game is, it does not prepare you to actually play it. It doesn't help that despite this game being the longest out of the entire franchise, it somehow has the least amount of story, which I didn't even know was possible. Again, I'm not reviewing these games, but this was just terrible, and it was the least amount of fun I've had playing one of these games. Let's try and talk about its sorry excuse for a story now. In the beginning, we see the glam rock animatronics perform a show, but it's abruptly cut short when they all begin to malfunction. The game then properly begins as Freddy reboots and notices that he has a child named Gregory hiding inside of him. Gregory is our main protagonist, and he's afraid of being caught by the security guard for some odd reason. I wish the game would tell us. Freddy, being the lovable oaf that he is, decides to help and tries to lead us to the exit, but before we can, the Mega Pizzaplex shuts down for the night, meaning Gregory is stuck there until the doors open again at 6 AM. By the way, the game setting is this massive pizzeria slash amusement park slash mall slash bowling alley conglomerate thing. I don't even understand how a company as tarnished as Fazbear Entertainment managed to become extremely successful again. I liked it better when they were a struggling business because at least then, they didn't have the need to tell us that this small pizza chain was big enough to basically become Disneyland, especially with all the child deaths that occur here. It really breaks my sense of disbelief in a series where I already constantly break my sense of disbelief, but this is just pushing it. Anyways, during your first escape, all the other animatronics begin to act extremely aggressive towards Gregory, taunting him at nearly every encounter and never shutting up. This makes the pizzeria an incredibly dangerous place to be at night, so Freddy decides it's a good idea to throw you into the danger to try and find another exit. Or they could spend the rest of the night inside of Freddy's room and call it a day, but instead, the game forces you to explore this gigantic maze of a complex because... I'm being a bit facetious, but the only reason you explore the Pizzaplex is to find a different exit. But the more you explore, the more you get lost, and the more stuff you end up doing with no real reason as to what or why you're doing it to begin with. The game really just meanders for the majority of its runtime. There is some story sprinkled here and there, but you just end up surviving whatever the game throws at you next before the game remembers that it has a story, to which it just ends. You're really just wasting time for most of your playthrough, with your only real goal is to escape, and that's it. It would have been one thing if the game constantly built towards something, but it really doesn't. Sure, there are elements of a story being told, such as Gregory being suspicious of the security guard named Vanessa, as well as being chased around by this person in a bunny suit named Vanny, who is seemingly behind everything, but outside of your first couple encounters, they pretty much just disappear from the story altogether. You will forget that they're even in the game because of how little they're used throughout the story. It's so strange just how much story was wasted in this game. The plot thread that Help Wanted set up is interesting, as Willie and Afton seemingly possessing this girl to continue his evil schemes can lead to some cool stories, but she ends up doing nothing in the entire game. The security bots are far more threatening than her, which is pretty sad. If you play this game, you will forget that you're supposed to be up against Vanny. Also, the possessed girl is confirmed to be Vanessa, because who else could it be?
I think her name is Vanny?
Vanny. It is very similar to Vanessa. And also Bunny. That cannot be a coincidence.
Anyways, at some point, Freddy ends up getting smashed up by an unknown entity and has to get repaired, which requires Gregory to shatter the other animatronics in order to upgrade Freddy. You then spend the rest of the game doing exactly that. I know it's explained that you need the other upgrade parts to move around the Pizzaplex, but the only goal is to survive, not to explore the Pizzaplex. This plot point was added to extend the runtime, since the game offers no real reason as why you need to explore in the first place. If maybe we saw the other animatronics being tampered with by Vanny or something, seeing that something is really wrong with this place, then this could have given us some sort of reason as to why we should explore, but no, we just end up wasting time upgrading Freddy before we are told that we can just leave. It's very jarring how abrupt it all ends up feeling. Before you leave the Pizzaplex, Freddy then all of a sudden, lore drops on you, saying that you should stay so you can find out about the disappearances. Which, what? When the hell did disappearances happen? Did Freddy read the script? This is what I mean by the story having no compelling reason to keep going. I would have liked it if the story bits were spaced out throughout the game, making you actually care about what's going on, rather than having it all dumped at once near the end of the story with no build up. This game has multiple endings, some of which I'm pretty sure are meant to be jokes, but others kinda break my brain a little. In our first ending, we escape the Pizzaplex, but find out that our boy Gregory is homeless, who lives in a box. We then finally see some evidence of children being reported as missing in the Pizzaplex, while we see Vanny ominously in the background, ready to do nothing like in the rest of the game. In our second ending, we end up facing off against Vanny. She uses her magic powers to control the staff bots and disassemble Freddy, but this ends up backfiring on her as the staff bots also attack her for no real reason. Gregory then cries as his new mobile home deactivates before his very eyes, but this ending can actually change. If you manage to play these Princess Quest arcade cabinets scattered around the Pizzaplex, you will unlock a new ending for the game, as a final arcade cabinet will spawn in Vanny's hideout. While playing through Princess Quest, you will soon realize that you're playing through some replica levels from Help Wanted, such as the Corn Maze, as well as the main hub world. You end up collecting both the Glitch Trap plush as well as Vanny's mask, which end up unlocking a door from the ending of Help Wanted. This action then seemingly frees Vanessa from being possessed, and then the game ends with you, Freddy, and Vanessa having ice cream. Boo! It's very funny that we spent an entire game setting up a new villain, only for them to be redeemed in the next game with little to no fanfare. Vanny really is just potential, man. Then we have the secret ending, which is accomplished once we shatter every other animatronic and upgrade Freddy to his final form. This gives us access to a new area underneath Roxy Racers, where we discover that the building from Pizzeria Simulator sunk to the ground and the Pizzaplex was seemingly built over it, which I have several questions. But before we could even think about that, we then see the animatronics from Pizzeria Simulator, and they have all merged into this amorphous blob. Glad to see that their souls were put to rest. But before you could even think about that, once you make it to the bottom, you then discover that Springtrap, aka Purple Guy, aka William Afton, aka Peanut Head, is still alive. What do you mean he's still here? How the hell did he escape Super Hell? Is this even William Afton? Or is this the USB cloud version of him that was introduced in Help Wanted? It's very annoying that this story refuses to evolve past Springtrap. I don't like to do this because I'm just an idiot who barely pays attention, but when this game first came out, I initially thought that the final boss was going to be Vanny using Glam Rock Bonnie as a new Springlock suit. This made sense to me since this game hints at Bonnie being mysteriously absent, with messages saying that Bonnie was last spotted at a certain spot in the pizzeria. It would also make narrative sense for Vanessa to use Bonnie as a suit as a parallel to Gregory using Freddy as a suit. Look, it made more sense to me, okay? But instead, this game just retreads the same old story of William Afton being the true bad guy all along. He then fights Springtrap by doing absolutely nothing until Springtrap gets defeated by the melted animatronics. Well, that was anticlimactic. There is also another ending where for some reason, Gregory discovers that Vanny is indeed Vanessa, but then you see another Vanessa on top of the burning Pizzaplex, which, okay? And that was most of the endings, and they were all very disappointing because a lot of these felt super cheap with very little substance, or come out of nowhere with no proper build-up. I wish the game had an actual story that was being built up throughout the game, but nope, the game just ends. We are still not done, because like in previous games, we also have secrets to look at. Yay! More security breach, how fun. The secrets in this game are really annoying because it makes the story a lot more convoluted than it actually is. So there's these CDs that are scattered throughout the building that can only be obtained once you gouged out Roxy's eyes. You then take them to the secret room, which looks exactly like Michael's house from Sister Location, which, okay? I'm not even gonna explain that, let's move on. These CDs basically tell a long and fairly convoluted story. FNAF and Convoluted Never, in which we hear therapy sessions between multiple therapists and presumably Vanessa. We learn that Vanessa works for Fazbear Entertainment, but has been moved around a lot due to her not being able to fit in. We also learn that she has had a lot of past trauma, such as her dad being really abusive. We also learn that she has been talking to someone that no one else can see, and confirm that she sewed together a bunny costume. Huh, suspicious. We also learned that Vanessa is presumably a super smart computer hacker who has glitched the animatronics and the Pizzaplex security systems. I say presumably because we don't actually know if the therapist is only just talking to Vanessa. In some of the recordings, we can hear Vanessa talk back to the therapist, but in the others, it's just the therapist talking. Because of this, some have speculated that this could be Vanessa's split personality taking over, being Vanny. Vanny is a lot more asocial and never talks during her sessions, and is seemingly more aggressive as her therapist seemed to go missing. Vanny could also just be William Afton taking over and doing all the evil biddings, such as being super smart and super evil. But more importantly, we learned that Vanny may have lied about her past trauma, as she actually had good parents and a good life, according to the therapist. But since we know that Vanny is actually possessed, this could just be William venting about his own past life. But this isn't the only theory, as some fans have decided that the other person being talked to is not Vanny, but Gregory instead, because of the books. I'm just going to ignore that because I feel like this breaks the narrative of the game and isn't really supported with that much evidence. This is going to be contradicted once the new game comes out. So we basically get a bit of backstory for Vanessa from these CDs, and once again learn that she is indeed possessed. I wish I could add more, but the story is so vague and really adds only a little bit of mystery as to how Vanny operates. We do learn that Vanny may not be the actual security guard, as the technicians don't know who she is. This would explain why she's the only human in the entire building and why she has dens hidden throughout the game. The game also has other secrets that are honestly very vague and I have no idea what they mean, such as this Balloon Boy minigame that I only did because it unlocks one of the endings. I forgot which one and I'm too lazy to look it up. And that's finally the end of this game, and what a mess it was. When this game was first released, the theories and speculation was all over the place because the game did such a poor job at conveying its story even remotely competently. It's such a shame too because this game had the potential to be great, but instead, it's an uneven mess. Because of how severe the backlash was for this game, with the biggest criticism being that it wasn't scary, Steelwool decided to course correct and release a new expansion that will help fix the issues that many had with this game. And how did it turn out? Well, let's find out. This expansion takes place sometime after the events of Security Breach, with the whole Pizzaplex now being completely abandoned and in ruin. It is strange that this place turned to shit so fast, but I guess that's what happens when the place wasn't exactly built to code. You play as Cassie, who is called into the Pizzaplex by Gregory, who claims to be trapped inside the building and needs to be rescued. Instead of getting help, Cassie decides to go into the dangerous mission by herself. He then explored the Pizzaplex, which honestly does look a lot creepier when left in this completely desolate state. It is nice when the game tries to be a horror game and not whatever the hell Security Breach was aiming for. As you explore, you run into the glam rock animatronics, who are somehow still functional even after all the abuse they were put through by Gregory. Cassie then falls deeper into the Pizzaplex, but is soon met by a staff bot who is wearing bunny ears. He gives you the Vanny mask from Help Wanted, and when you put it on, you enter this virtual reality world that lets you phase in and out of objects. Okay, sure. At this point of the series, it has been pushing the sci-fi elements so hard that this is pretty much par for the course now. I have no fight left in me. Cassie is then informed by Gregory that she needs to disable the security nodes that are hidden throughout the building in order to help release him from the room he is currently trapped in. This requires you to use the Vanny mask to locate them. However, when you use the mask, this lovely virtual bunny glitch begins to appear, and while it can't hurt you when it reaches you, it does alert the other animatronics of your presence in the area. So that's the basic gameplay loop. Explore the abandoned building, disable the security nodes, and avoid enemies. It's a lot more linear than the base game, but after experiencing that clusterfuck of a game, it is a nice change of pace. As you explore, you learn more about who exactly Cassie is, as whenever you put on the mask, you see images that flesh out Cassie's past a bit, such as her being good friends with Gregory, and her favorite animatronic being Roxy. We also learned that her dad works for Fazbear Entertainment, as she comments that her dad uses a fast wrench for his work, which, if I worked for a company that made me use tools that look like toys, I think that would be pretty rad. Cassie eventually runs into Roxy, who is somehow wearing a mask, and just as she's about to attack you, she realizes that you're not Gregory and releases you. After disabling more security nodes, you eventually are able to stop the glitch rabbit from going after you, as the security nodes were allowing this thing to appear in the first place. Then, while you're heading towards Gregory's location, he tells you that you need to shut down Roxy despite her not being a threat to Cassie. She complies, but not before she's able to talk to Cassie about a birthday she had at the Pizzaplex. Cassie then reaches Gregory's supposed location, which turns out to be the underground pizzeria from the Burn Trap ending. However, this place looks completely different than it did in that ending, as there seems to be no trace of Burn Trap or the multi-animatronics anywhere. Not only that, but through your playthrough, you would find these boxes which contain some drawings that were made by Gregory, all of which seem to show different endings from Security Breach, including a drawing from the Burn Trap ending. When you reach the final room, Gregory tells you to break him out of this concrete wall, and once you do, you come face to face with... What the hell is that? No, seriously, what is that? This isn't a joke. Are we supposed to know what this is? Why is this game treating it like a big reveal? Well, if you really want to know, this thing is the Mimic, and it's the new big bad of this series that was first introduced from the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. Why? So the Mimic was the true bad guy all along, as he tricked you into releasing him, with the Glitch Bunny being the only thing keeping it contained inside the Pizzaplex, which you have just disabled by the instruction of not Gregory, but by the Mimic, as it can completely replicate anyone's voice at will. This is the point of the series where a lot of fans, myself included, get extremely annoyed at the lore, since Security Breach's story was so poorly received, with many outright hating that Springtrap somehow came back. Steelwool and Scott decided to course correct and retcon that ending out of existence, as hinted by Gregory's drawings, saying that that ending never happened, and that the Mimic was really the true bad guy the whole time. See, it was always there. It really does come out of nowhere, with the Mimic having no build-up whatsoever, so it feels like it was forcefully jammed in there with no thought as to how it's going to affect the story going forward. It's even worse that the Mimic originates from the books, with many fans getting frustrated that the spin-off books are almost mandatory reading if you really want to understand the lore now. And I really don't want to do that. I feel like if a story wants to take elements from other sources, then that's mostly fine, as long as it doesn't reach the point where it becomes homework. I really feel like this ruins the storytelling, as you now have to keep up with every single piece of media from this franchise to see the whole picture, rather than it just being optional. It's like how in the MCU, when they started to make those Disney Plus shows canon to the movies, and if you didn't feel like watching all those shows, then you would end up lost in some of the later movies where TV show characters and plot points began to show up. It just becomes a chore, and this is what the Mimic ends up feeling like. Anyways, the Mimic begins to chase Cassie, but Roxy, who is still alive, somehow saves you. Then the real Gregory calls you and helps you escape via the elevator. But then Gregory turns on Cassie, and maybe lets her drop down the elevator. I say maybe because for all we know, this could be the Mimic again. But right before the game ends, you hear Roxy's voice calling out for Cassie. But this isn't the end, as what has now become a tradition to the series, we have multiple endings. During the final chase sequence, if Cassie runs into the standee of Freddy and puts out the Vanny mask, you are then transported to the supposed happy ending where Gregory, Helpy, and Vanessa are all hanging out on a hill. This is a very dark ending, as it basically implies that Cassie accepts her fate and transports her mind to a happy thought before the Mimic reaches her. The final ending requires you to find a bunch of hidden camera feeds throughout your playthrough, which ends up opening up a bunch of doors. After finding them all, you then replay the final segment again, but now the Mimic seems to be wearing an old lion costume. It begins to chase you down, but rather than running to the elevator, you now go through a hallway, which happens to be the doors you were opening in those hidden cameras. You end up in this room, and when the Mimic tries to break in, Cassie uses this lever and seemingly scoops out the Mimic out of existence. I'm glad that the new big bad got defeated in the first appearance. And that's pretty much the story of this DLC, and I honestly don't like it very much. The story is pretty much just throwing anything at the wall and seeing what sticks, with the Mimic being a bad mark against the story as a whole. It would be one thing if the Mimic was only ever hinted at, but the fact that it just hijacks the narrative and reveals that they were actually behind it all, it not only makes this story, but the story in Security Breach even more pointless. We now know that that story really doesn't build up to anything that actually matters, aside from the Princess Quest stuff. And it kinda tells its fans not to get too attached to the lore, as they can just retcon most of the story if they feel like it. Just like in the other games, there are also secrets that reveal a little bit more about the lore, but honestly, it reveals stuff that I don't personally care about and makes the story a whole lot dumber. For example, there is now interpersonal drama between the animatronics, since it's heavily hinted at that Monty attacked Bonnie so he can take the spotlight. But why does that matter? We've reached a point in the lore where the animatronics no longer feel scary because they feel too human, and that kind of defeats the purpose of them being relevant. The reason why the original games work is because the animatronics were uncanny abominations, and the more we learned about them, the creepier they got. But now they have full-fledged personalities with lines, quips, and remarks, and it really doesn't matter if they're possessed or not anymore, because they have pretty much become so different from what they started out as. It is kind of difficult to keep this franchise going, since after putting the children's souls to rest, where do you exactly go? The glitch trap plotline is an interesting direction to go, but that felt like it went nowhere. I think the direction with Roxy and Freddy is interesting, but until we see how their stories pan out, it really isn't that compelling to me. And don't even get me started on Vanny, since they had so much potential, only for them to get tossed aside and overshadowed almost immediately. I think we have reached the point in the series where it has officially gotten too convoluted for its own good, and the Mimic was the breaking point for me and many others. But we're not quite done yet, as we still have 2 more games to go through. This game is kinda strange, because it doesn't really have much of a story. So we play as a newly hired employee at Fazbear Entertainment, where we are tasked to do a bunch of stuff around the Pizzaplex, such as serving food to customers, getting the animatronics ready for their showtime, and a bunch of other remedial work. Sure, there are some lore tidbits here and there, but for the most part, it's just a collection of minigames. You also get VR recreations for Sister Location, but I'm not quite sure why those are here, since it's not really explained. And that's pretty much the whole game. Play minigames and get jump scared a lot. If you thought my job would get easier, then you're surely mistaken, as you might realize that this game hub world is once again inside the underground pizzeria, which is strange. But after completing a certain amount of levels, you gain access to a new room, which has an inhibitor, as well as a poster telling you to take off your mask. So the big reveal is that you were stuck in a simulated reality, as you were wearing the Vanny mask, as you now see the room completely in ruin. But instead of leaving, you decide to stay and complete more games. Some of these games do give us some insight, such as this game taking place sometime between the events of Security Breach and Ruined, as we help Roxy put on the mask that she wears during the DLC. But the biggest story reveal comes at the very end, when we are attacked by a bunch of spooky staff bots. We are then activated and come face to face with Cassie as we hand them the Vanny mask. Yep, that's right, we're playing as a guy who is put into a bunny staff bot from the beginning of Ruin. Yes, it all makes sense now. If you were as confused as I was when I first saw this cutscene, then let me explain. It turns out you are playing as Cassie's dad. We know this because during one of the carnival games, the animatronic there keeps heckling at you and talking about where your kids and family are. Not only that, but you use a fast wrench to gain access to the secret room, which we know that Cassie's dad uses since she brings up this fact. And that's pretty much it. I would complain, but after the clusterfuck that was Security Breach, it is nice that we got a pretty straightforward answer. This isn't the end, as once again, we have yet another secret ending. In order to get this one, we have to collect these hidden plushies that are scattered throughout the game. After collecting them all, we gain access to another Princess Quest game, but this time in VR. We play through it, and once we finally complete it, we come face to face with this giant Vanny, who sends out a son to collect the Glitch Trap plushie. Vanny gets a hold of it and turns it into Glitch Trap, but then Vanny crushes them before she disappears into the darkness. So you might also be asking yourself, what the hell is that? Well, if you really want to know, this basically confirms that Vanny was able to break through Glitch Trap's mind control, and she is now fully in control of her own actions. But the ending also hints that she may still be a bad guy with how she slips back into the darkness. Maybe this time she might actually do something. And that was the end of Help Wanted 2. And thank goodness, I needed a break from complaining. It's almost nice how simple and straightforward the story was. I didn't even need to complain once about how annoying this game was to play in flat mode. But we are not quite done yet, as there was an update that added a couple more secrets. We first need to enter the code 1979 into the number pad in one of the sister location levels. You will then be given a white tiger plush, and afterwards, a new room will appear that has a box in it. After playing it, a voice shouts at you, before being presented with an empty puzzle. Jigsaw pieces will then be scattered across the game, and after collecting them all and completing the puzzle, you will be presented with a new building, before a van shows up and what appears to be the computer that was holding the purple glitch bunny from Ruin shows up. They then jump scare you for a second before being sucked back into the computer and the van drives off. Now, what was that all about? Well, it was just a huge teaser for the next game. After doing all of that, you gain access to a new model that shows off this new creepy character in a jack-in-a-box, as well as the mimic in the lion costume. Interesting. And that's the entire lore for Help Wanted 2. Again, it's very short, and there really isn't much to talk about in terms of story. Thankfully, the next game in the series promises that it will explain what the mimic is. In a lot of ways, this game doesn't feel like a FNAF game at all, and that's mostly by design, since this is a prequel, going all the way back to the year 1979. You play as Arnold, an overworked employee for Fazbear Entertainment, and after working a 28-hour shift, they get another call from their employer, telling them to go visit a place called Murray's Costume Manor, in order to obtain some schematics. Arnold reluctantly agrees, and so we enter this abandoned location. It's filled with honestly a lot of neat but annoying puppets. We are told that this place is basically a subsidiary of Fazbear Entertainment, with them being responsible for making the animatronics and the spring-lock suits. But this place has long since shut down, with the whereabouts of the owner of the building being unknown. You are also warned that there's a certain entity lurking in the building called the Mimic, who is apparently very aggressive and attacks anyone that gets near it. They also have a knack for using the many mascot costumes scattered throughout the building, mimicking their behavior as best as it can. Unfortunately for Arnold, he needs to upgrade his data driver with certain terminals that also happen to be scattered throughout the building. While this may seem fairly simple, the Mimic, as it turns out, is very aggressive, as it will always show up in every critical room ready to hunt you down. So Arnold must complete his tasks, all the while avoiding the Mimic and getting some information on what exactly happened to Mary's Costume Manor. The story is mostly told through data and audio logs, where you learn more about Edwin Murray. Apparently, he made the Mimic, and it was his job to put the pieces together. He took over the family business after his father passed away. Edwin also happened to be a very creative guy, thinking of many inventions that would revolutionize how mascots are made. He would eventually meet a woman named Fiona, who was a puppeteer who worked for his company, and they would hit it off, eventually getting married and having a child named David. While Edwin was happy to have his family, his primary interest was in inventing things and trying to find ways to expand his business. This resulted in him neglecting his family and honestly becoming kind of a prick, with him prioritizing work over anything else. Things would only take a turn for the worse when Fiona would end up passing away during a tragic event in something called Fall Fest, which may or may not be related to that location we visited in that Help Wanted DLC. This caused Edwin to become devastated, as Fiona was in a lot of ways the one keeping Edwin straight and helping the company stay afloat, as he also had a knack of neglecting to run his business. Worse yet, he now had to raise his son by himself, so rather than being a good parent, Edwin proceeded to make a new invention. Back to the game. As Arnold explores more of the building, he runs into more enemies who are all being controlled by the Mimic in some shape or form. It is strange that the Mimic is basically able to fit into any machine so flawlessly, especially considering that this is supposed to be tech from the 1970s. I can mostly accept it in some cases when the Mimic is mostly using humanoid figures, but it becomes a lot harder to believe when it controls stuff like Top Hat. Like, sure, this thing can turn itself into a kaiju when it wants to. Somehow, Arnold is able to survive all the stuff that is being thrown at him while running on 0 hours of sleep. What a champ. He manages to upgrade his data driver to the higher security level, and is able to get a hold of the schematics. But just as you're about to leave, the Mimic attacks you. Your only way to escape is through the tunnels, which is being guarded by the Mimic wearing a white tiger costume, and now gains the ability to teleport. Yeah, sure. You manage to escape with the schematics in hand, and this is when we reach the multiple endings. The first ending is achieved by handing the schematics to your employer, and you're finally allowed to leave home. As you're leaving, you suddenly get a call from your employer again, asking you where the hell you've been. If you somehow didn't figure it out, it turns out the Mimic mimicked your employer and tricked you into giving the schematics to it. You then get attacked by the Mimic, and you wake up stuffed inside a prototype animatronic of Freddy, with the Mimic watching you in the foreground. Why it's using William's signature move is beyond me. The second ending can be achieved if you ignore the Mimic's commands to hand over the schematics, and you exit through a secret tunnel that happens to be right next to you. The Mimic then chases you once again, but this time, you end up in a Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria prototype room, full to the brim with spring-lock suits and a bunch of unfinished animatronics. You might notice that a certain someone is trying to prevent you from entering a certain room hidden in the back of this building, and once you finally reach them, you come face to face with the computer from Ruin. This computer has the voice of Fiona, and is urgently asking you to help the Mimic, as it needs to be reset in order to put a stop to its rampage. You then enter the funnest roller coaster known to man, as Mary's puppet fills him in on his financial situation. You then enter Mary's home, which has seen better days. The only way to escape is by collecting film reels, which reveal a lot of information as well as the code needed to escape. This is when we get the biggest lore drop. When Fiona was killed, Edwin thought it would be a great idea to make Fiona into a robot that would mimic all of Fiona's mannerisms and personality to fill in the void that she left behind.
She is such a bad bitch though!
And use that to raise David while he is busy bankrupting the company. Things were mostly going okay, but when Edwin was set to celebrate David's 5th birthday, David ends up getting hit by a car. The Fiona Mimic urges Edwin to make David into a Mimic as well, but Edwin was extremely against the idea, saying that he regretted even creating the Mimic in the first place. At some point, Edwin turns Mimic Fiona into a computer, while he tried to make David into the new Mimic, but with Edwin being that of the year, he decided to hit the Mimic. This pissed off the Mimic so much that it basically became corrupt and got aggressive, attacking Edwin and presumably killing him. Now that Arnold learned what the secret of the Mimic is, he honestly doesn't care that much, as he decides to get the hell out of there. While escaping, the Mimic finally shows its true form, and it looks really frail, which makes you question how it was able to survive all the damage we put it through. Either way, the building is now on fire, but Arnold somehow manages to escape to his van, but the Mimic is still on his ass, and Arnold ends up crashing. In the wreckage, a weak Arnold comes face to face with the Mimic, who rips the schematics away from him, leaving Arnold to perish in the wreckage. This leaves us with one question. Did a trash can just attack me? But there is one final secret ending that can only be achieved by collecting all the collectibles, as well as replaying the game in New Game Plus. This allows us to complete this minigame called Moon.exe, which is this old choose-your-own-adventure game that I'm not even going to try and explain the meaning of, cause I honestly don't get it. But once you finish the game, the computer gives you access to a new security clearance that allows you to enter some new rooms in Mary's home. After replaying the entire game again, you then enter what can only be presumed to be David's room. The Mimic then shows up, but you manage to calm it down just long enough to reset its systems, and the Mimic reverts back to David and puts itself to sleep. And that's the whole lore, A Secret of the Mimic, and thankfully, it manages to tell a mostly cohesive story. You did it, Scott. I'm proud of you. It only took you 10 games, but we finally made it. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of this game. It's not that it's bad, I just don't really like the way this game is structured. It's extremely linear and very basic, which is a huge step up from Security Breach, don't get me wrong, and probably the best game of the Steelwall era, but the game really doesn't feel like FNAF to me. I think this stems mostly from the game feeling too much like a generic mascot horror game. It doesn't help that the costumes that the Mimic uses all range from ugly to forgettable. Truthfully, I only liked like 2 of the designs, while everyone else was really bland. I also cannot stress this enough, but Mary's story isn't all that compelling for me. Edwin is far too unlikable to even have any sort of sympathy for him, as he seems like he kinda dug his own grave, especially when you learn that he had plenty of opportunities to bail himself out, but he was too stupid to do so. It's made even worse when some of his inventions are so poorly thought out that he ends up putting his employees in constant danger. Not to mention how much of a pompous asshole he is towards his family. It made me root against him, especially when we learned through text logs that William Afton basically stole all of Edwin's work, which is honestly better since at least he can run the company. I think a lot of this could have been alleviated if Edwin had been introduced earlier. That way all of his lore could have been more spaced out, and we could have found his story more tragic, but I think it was far too late to be introducing characters like him into this franchise. As for the Mimic, he's okay. It is dumb that Edwin was able to solve artificial intelligence back in the 70s, and no one, including William, found out about it, but I guess that's what makes it so secret. I'm also not a fan that there was yet another company that also made another killer robot, because it makes the whole world as a whole a lot less interesting. Like, this can be replicated anywhere, I guess. The game also has other secrets, such as this guy in a moon costume who seemingly isn't the Mimic, which is kinda creepy, but there isn't much else to this part of the story. Learning that Chica's party world was a creation made by Fiona was neat, but that's all I have to say about that. While the story was told well, I didn't find it all that compelling. I just didn't think that the secret was all that interesting, being that the Mimic mimicked someone that we never knew until this game came out. Maybe if the secret had been something really stupid, like the Mimic was in every FNAF game, it would have pissed a lot of people off, sure, but at least then, it would have made the story interesting. But as is, it's an okay addition to the lore. At least we now know for sure that the books and games are not connected, as the Mimic in the books is far different than he is in the game, so we can be rest assured that the illiterate still don't have to read, hooray! Again, the story was serviceable, but it just didn't feel like a FNAF game to me. And that was the entire lore of FNAF so far. And what did we learn? I don't know. The FNAF lore really has changed so much since it first began, and that mostly stems from the fact that the story got made up as it went along. While mostly made sense in the beginning, it quickly got convoluted, just trying to justify itself to keep going. If you really want to summarize the FNAF lore, then the story is basically about a killer who stuffed his victims inside his robotic creations that came to life, and he ultimately met the same demise when he was confronted by the spirits of his victims. It really is that simple. The problem arose when more details began to come out that made the story messier, such as new locations being opened up that all have some sort of tragedy, more characters constantly being introduced with little to no development, and a poorly thought out second half that was so bad that it had to be retconned to make any sort of sense. While still remain a loyal fan, I won't be shy to admit that the story really doesn't make any sense, but I will still be here for whenever the next installment comes out, just so I could see how much more complicated the story can get. But I'd be lying if it isn't getting a bit tiring to see the story spin its wheels with no real sense of direction. I think the series really shot itself in the foot by introducing the Mimics so late and in the fashion that they did. If that plot point was introduced more organically, then I think more fans would have been okay with the direction the series was heading in. But instead, the lore has now become whatever it feels like, and it makes it hard to stay invested in if the lore would completely change come the next game or update. Sorry for being so negative, but I just feel so underwhelmed by the current state of the FNAF lore. Back when Scott was the only one telling the story, it was messy and it still didn't make much sense, but at least he ended the series in a satisfying enough fashion. Now the franchise feels very corporate for a lack of better words, and it's only being continued for the sake of keeping the brand going. Maybe the next game will be amazing, but for now, the lore has reached a point where it feels like it can't do much anymore. So what now? Well, I'll still continue to be a fan. I'll still rewatch all of Markiplier's playthroughs, all of MatPat's old Fury videos, and I'll continue to appreciate what the series has brought to life. Despite my complaining and bitching about how the lore doesn't make any sense, I'll still be the first one to see how much more dumb it could get because again, I'm a sucker for dumb storytelling, and I did get that in spades throughout the entire series. The FNAF lore really is simple, but told in the most cryptic fashion possible that it made millions of fans obsessed with trying to solve it. Hell, I'll still watch countless videos on people trying to dissect these stories because it will be endlessly entertaining seeing people twist themselves trying to understand what's going on. And maybe in a couple more years, I'll make another video on this franchise again. At least we had the movies. I wonder how those turned out. Oh boy.